Welcome to Terra's Baddy Club. Today's guest, I have my friend, Dr. Judy Ho. She did a podcast, my old podcast, Time Out with Terra. She also did a workshop that I put together that was about 3 years ago. So I'm really excited to have her today. She's talking about her new book, The New Attachment. So I'm really excited to get into it. She is a neuropsychologist and she's just amazing and has so many great things to talk about. But today we're going to talk about her book, The New Attachment. So let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Judy Ho. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know that you are so close and dear to my heart, but why don't you tell the audience, for those that don't know you, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, so great to connect with you again, Terra. It feels like it's been such a long time, but I'm Dr. Judy Ho. I'm a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and a published author. And my newest book is called The New Rules of Attachment. So this book is all about how to heal your relationships, reparent your inner child, and secure your life vision. I'm so excited to share this information.
I love it so much. And I think that the attachment trauma, the attachment theory is so important because it really helps you define your relationship needs and your relationship style. Like, why is the attachment theory so important to you personally?
So for me, it feels like it's the genesis of everything. When you want to go deeper to understand why the roots of the behaviors that aren't working or the feelings and thoughts that are really plaguing you, like where do they come from? It really comes from those early attachment bonds. And sometimes people are surprised by that something so early on in their childhood can continue to affect them throughout their life. But there's two important things to know. One is the early bonds attachment really affect us in this way because that's the time that we're really understanding how the world works and our place in it. And so those rules tend to stick with us longer, even as adults, when those rules may no longer necessarily apply. But the second piece of it, and this is the great news, is that no matter what happened in your past, even if it is influencing you now, you can heal at any age and any stage. And it's all about developing a secure attachment to yourself. And so this is the whole theme of reparenting your inner child that I think is so important for people to understand and dissect, and also know that this is not a frou-frou idea. We all have this metaphorical little us living inside us, and it's really about being able to, as your adult self, reparent that inner child to give that child what it needs so that you can succeed in all the areas of your life.
I love it so much. Now, what are some of the different attachment theories out there, the different attachment styles?
So there are 4 different attachment styles. There's 1 secure style and 3 insecure attachment styles. And the research is a little varied on it, but in general, it's pretty much like about a quarter of each. So it's not like there's one that is really predominant, really based on the research that you're reading. Each of the styles is somewhere around a quarter of the population. So the secure attachment is somebody who generally had a parent who was consistent in their caring and their support, was generally there for them whenever they had trouble, and try to do their best. I would say maybe 80% of the time. That is going to result in somebody who has secure attachment, who has healthy sense of boundaries, a strong sense of self. And even if they come across troubles, they do tend to more likely persevere through them without relying on unhealthy coping strategies. The first type of insecure attachment is anxious attachment. So this may be a person in their childhood had a parent who maybe was preoccupied with some of their own emotional concerns, or maybe made it seem like their love and caring was kind of conditional on various things. And so then as an adult, you start to be overly reliant on other people to affirm yourself and to understand who you are. And if you're away from somebody you care about for a little bit of time, you start to feel anxious about, what is my standing with this person? Do they still care about me? Somebody who has avoidant attachment likely developed that because as a parent, they were exposed to parents who, sometimes were just not available physically or emotionally. Sometimes these children were asked to grow up a lot sooner. And there was a lot of responsibility, and the parents are saying, we're too busy, so you need to roll your sleeves up and take care of that. So oftentimes they also feel like their self-worth comes from being like the star child of the family or their achievements. So as an adult, that kind of theme continues. They invest more in goals and their career rather than people. They tend to be a little bit more uncomfortable with too much emotional intimacy. And when the going gets tough, they really just retreat into themselves. They don't tell anybody about it. The last type of insecure attachment is disorganized attachment. So this, I think, is the most misunderstood one. Most people think disorganized attachment is somehow like a mix of the other two insecure attachment styles, or sometimes people think that this is a style that it's the worst and you're not going to get better. And I think that all of that is untrue. The most important thing to know about this style is that generally, as a younger person, they were exposed to periods of trauma or extreme stressors, and it causes them to be a bit more hypervigilant. They're essentially in fight or flight a lot more of the time than they really should be for their own mental and physical health. But they're kind of like surveillance specialists. They're always wondering when the other foot is going to drop. And because they are exposed to chaos oftentimes in their early childhood, as an adult, they tend to seek that chaos even subconsciously, which makes it a lot harder for them to emotionally regulate.
Okay. And with the disorganized attachment, I know that a lot of people say that it's like kind of a mixture of the two and that that's not quite exactly true itself. How do you kind of navigate that you have a disorganized attachment when you think, okay, I might be a little bit avoidant, it might be a little bit of anxious attachment?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times when people have disorganized attachment or when they have a combination of attachment styles, that's also very common. People sometimes will say, well, I'm disorganized maybe in my romantic relationships, but then like at work, I'm maybe more secure or maybe I'm anxious. And that's obviously a big part of the population too, that they find themselves in some type of a combo. But I think in terms of navigating a mixed type, I think it's really just important to know, which self-statements, which thoughts do you tend to say to yourself that's associated with each type? And I go into this in my book in terms of, well, this is your operating system. This is kind of a default operating system you developed as a child. And as an adult, you're still carrying these rules with you, but some of them don't apply anymore. And so the first part is really just understanding that these rules are rules that you've been following, and it's consciously uh, understanding that that's what's going on and then creating healing patterns to replace those more unhealthy or unrealistic thoughts that aren't serving your life now.
Okay. I really appreciate that answer. And because I have a lot of friends that think that they may be anxiously attached, and then they kind of go into the disorganized attachment and they go back and forth. They're like, what am I? But also, when you're with, like, say you're an anxious person and you're with a avoidant, can it bring out more anxious qualities or disorganized attachment in you?
Yeah, definitely. So, I do personally believe that all attachment types can get along with other attachment types, but it takes some self-awareness, and it also takes empathy and kindness to the other style, because sometimes the styles will trigger each other's defenses and each other's unhealthy coping mechanisms. So one of the most common types that tend to be attracted to one another is the anxious and the avoidant. And possibly one, it's like a little bit of an opposites attract, but two, I think that both types are trying to resolve some of their earlier traumas and stresses. And they just find themselves attracted to people who replicate the roles of other people in their lives when they were younger. So oftentimes, people who have anxious attachment, there was somebody in their life that they were seeking validation from, a parent or another important adult. And so then they are attracted to partners where it feels like they have to prove themselves somehow to earn their love. And so then they end up getting into this sort of like chasing scenario where they're chasing them for their affection, chasing them for their validation. And then the avoidantly attached person, they're uncomfortable with too much emotional closeness and intimacy. And so when that happens, they tend to back away. They tend to want to go into themselves. They tend to like start reinforcing these ideas from earlier in life that, it's better to focus on goals and achievements rather than on people and developing and cultivating those relationships. And again, that replicates a type of pattern they experience as children, perhaps having parents who only showed up whenever you were getting an award or you were going to be the star player of your team. But like if you weren't, if you were on the bench that day, they're like, well, we're not coming. So these types of ideas, they kind of permeate our lives. But then the interesting thing is, after the anxious attached person starts to feel like, well, this person's a lost cause, like I'm not going to chase after them anymore, so I'm not getting what I need. That's when the person with avoidant attachment will say, oh, well, now wait a minute, now I miss this person. And then they start that courtship process again, because avoidantly attached people tend to be most comfortable in the courtship process and kind of like show up, be shiny, and like be amazing, and the hero that they were looking for. But then the cycle repeats itself when things really get close again, and then the avoidant person starts to back away, and then the anxious person starts to chase that reinforcement. And so, all of this is to say that oftentimes there are patterns of trauma reenactment that we all do, sometimes subconsciously. But if you recognize those patterns, then you can give that other person grace. Like, okay, this is what they're looking for, and here's what I can give them, while still balancing the fact that I'm still working out my own issues. You don't have to be perfect individuals when you come together, because there's no such thing, but it's really just about understanding your own patterns and being kind and gentle to the other person who might need something different than you. I kind of think of it like the love languages, like knowing somebody's attachment, like, is sort of like the love languages, like knowing what they need. Like, how can you give it to them if you care about this person?
Okay. And something I think that happens with the avoidant person is whenever you kind of push the relationship to a certain place where you're like, oh, I want kids. Oh, I want to move in together, or I need more time together. That's when I feel like they start to pull away. Am I not mistaken?
Yeah, definitely. It's like when you're asking for that one other level of attachment, essentially another level of closeness, another level of intimacy. That's when they start to make excuses. They start to question the relationship. Like, well, why can't we just keep it the way it is? It's so fun. It's so light. They tend to want things to be light because, in general, they find that other people tend to disappoint them when they get too close. And so, it's interesting. But avoidantly attached people, they want connection just like every other human being, but it's more that when things get too close, they're worried that the other person's going to become disappointed because they're not going to be able to measure up to what they were hoping for. That would be one reason. And the other reason is, what if I get so attached to this person, I start to rely on them, and then they go away? If they go away, then what am I going to do? Like, I've invested in this person, and now I'm going to be disappointed. So I think that it is important to know that actually behind a lot of that rejection, pushing away, is still a deep need to connect, but they just don't totally know exactly how to connect.
Do you see a lot of men and women and significant others working out their problems with being anxiously attached and then being avoidant? Or do you see it most of the time kind of coming together and combusting?
Yeah, I actually can see a real synergy and a way to work together between the different insecure attachment styles. I don't think that it necessarily has to combust, but it does require active listening of the other person in the partnership, and really being able to um, wrestle with your own demons, wrestle with your own baggage, and say, can I overcome this to the point where we can have a harmonious relationship? And also knowing that some of what's going on with insecure attachment and how they cope, it may not even be healthy for that person either, but it's really about meeting the person where they are. And like, let's try to see how we can get along, given that you're still working out your difficulties and I'm still working out mine. And so much of it is just showing up mindfully and then being honest with each other. So having this active listening process, having open communication about how you're really feeling, and not necessarily disengaging at the first sign of conflict, or like becoming overly anxious at the first sign of conflict either.
Okay. Do you find that sometimes avoidant people will handle it really well in the beginning, and then as time goes on, they start to, like, if you're bringing up the same issue, they just don't handle it the same way later on?
Yeah, I think that they can have a little bit of a shorter fuse, and a lesser tolerance for talking about emotional content. I think that that can be kind of difficult for them. So some ways to try to make it a little bit easier is really having a way to compromise so that each of you get a little bit of what you need. The person who might be more anxious might say, look, I want to talk to you a little bit about how I'm feeling, but I also understand that you don't like these conversations to drag on and on. So like, how about if we just like set aside 5 minutes, let me try my best to kind of get everything out. And then like, when 5 minutes is up, we can like take a break, and then we can revisit it later tonight or tomorrow morning, right? Really meeting the person where they're at so that they can receive the information in the best way possible and be able to address your needs from there.
Yeah. I used to be with a lot of avoidant people, and something I realized I would have to ask them, be like, okay, are you in the place to be able to talk about this right now? And a lot of the times they're like, no, I need 5 minutes, or I need 10 minutes, or I need a day.
Right. Exactly. And it is interesting, and thanks for sharing your own experience that what you need in the moment might not be what they need in the moment. And so it's like it kind of it's sometimes it's frustrating because you're like, well, I really want to talk about it now. And I really want to set aside the time to like really make this work. But sometimes they're just not in the place. And then it's not going to help if you try to force the situation. So it is better to like have a plan of, okay, well, when are we going to get back together? Because it's not enough to just say, okay, we'll talk about it later, because then the avoidantly attached person could just avoid it forever. So it is important to say, okay, we have to set up a time within the next 24 hours where we're going to come back and do this. And sometimes it's helpful to kind of build in another ritual around it. Like, okay, well, let's do it over coffee tomorrow morning, or like, let's do it on our morning walk. That can be helpful because then there's something else that's like ritualistic, that is a positive association, so that it doesn't feel like, oh man, I'm really dreading this conversation. It's like, no, like it's already something that you like doing, that you enjoy doing. It's already something that you already do together. And then you're just building in time to emotionally connect over something that might be troubling you during that time.
So true. I think that a lot of my clients, and probably a lot of your clients as well, are probably anxiously attached people that kind of get into these situations, because I feel like more women seek out help than men. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that generally women feel a little bit more willing to say, this is something that I need help with, and lean on their community support. I think that there is stigma for both sexes, but I think for men, there are more barriers to like accessing support, because there's more men in general who see having mental health concerns of any kind as a character weakness, as opposed to, oh, this is just normal and we all feel this way sometimes.
Okay. I love that so much. And then what else would you recommend people do with their attachment styles to learn about it? Like, where would they start? Just like with your book, reading that, and then going from checking out videos that you do, or other things?
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question. So first of all, they can start with my attachment quiz. So that's available online. You can go to my social media for the links, and that's a free quiz that you can access from my book to identify your attachment style. And then the second thing is to first of all like follow me on social media, because I talk a lot about this and provide free resources there and on my website. But definitely check out my book, because the idea is that there are these practical tools that anyone can roll up their sleeves and do a little bit each day to start healing their attachment style. And so I think that if you find that the quiz was of interest, or you look at my social media, you're like, oh, I want to know more about these things, then definitely get a copy of my book, where you can learn more about exactly how to heal each of the styles, and also how to get along with other styles that you might be in relationships with.
I love that so much. And something about your book that I really enjoyed reading was, I've honestly read so many different attachment books, but your book made it really easy to understand. Where when I've read other books, it's been so confusing. And like, you just put it straight in front of your brain, where you're able to break it down and understand it, and then adapt it into your own life. So that's why I really loved your book. And I just have to say that. So where can we find your book? Where can we find your social media, everything?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me, because I know that you know a lot about this topic. And I think that is one of the challenges, is that attachment feels like such a big topic that it's so complex to try to cover, right? And so that's probably why there's not as many books out there on this topic as opposed to some other ones. But you can follow me on social media at Dr. Judy Ho, and you can visit my website, drjudyho.com. And the New Rules of Attachment is available wherever books are sold, including Amazon, including my publisher's website, and a variety of other websites as well.
Perfect. And then thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to ask you one more question for the Patreon, but thank you for today's interview. Thank you for listening to this episode with Dr. Judy Ho. Please check out my 30-day journal for trauma. It's amazing, and it gives you a lot of tools to work with. So I'm really excited that I'm finally putting it out there. And please subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.